I tried to get us back on time. Was that close? Okay. Huh?
We go, you know, technically.
Oh, we getting us back on time?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Too bad. What?
How was that?
What clicker?
Was that okay?
Yeah, that's good. Do you have two mics or do we have to share?
2 mics. Ooh, yeah, there's one.
Okay. You're a walker?
What, you don't think I can be loud?
No. Do you
I can be loud. I have no problem with that.
Here you go.
And it's on or off. Those are your choices.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I've got no.
Put it on your badge.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
we're running into the same problem.
You're...
Oh.
Can help me somewhere. I'm sure there's somewhere. Or up top, somewhere. I think it's on.
Well, if I had a mic bell.
Well, why didn't you bring one?
Because I didn't realize what just ignore
Can I just
this.
tuck it in my bra?
You know, they can hear you.
You're on right now. You turn it off.
No, can't do it.
Can you turn it off?
No, I got it on.
Now it's under your shirt.
I'm just gonna put it.
You have video? You have video.
Yep.
Yes, we do.
Video. Okay. And then you're all the way up. Almost. You're up.
Feel enough button?
Yes. Just flip it and turns it on and turns it off. And you know it's on because you'll see.
Okay. Oh, now I'm on. Got it.
You'll
These
go
are
to the
like the
bathroom.
oldest lavaliers ever. I know people who can hook you up with new ones.
That's me. No, I'm gonna hold on to it. Okay.
Yeah, I probably will too, because this will annoy me. Anyway, I am very laid back. I just kind of. Okay. Did I log out of email and everything? Yes.
Yeah, you got your blank turn off.
I can't get that to close. It never closes anymore. Yeah. So, we'll go with disturb. So hopefully that will. I still think this dress has pockets, and I keep looking for pockets. It doesn't have pockets.
You just need to buy more dresses with pockets.
I think you need to have some putting on this one now.
You could though, I think.
Isn't this good? I love my pockets. Oh yeah, totally. And we have, I mean, it's not real curly, but I have a little thing that makes it can fit.
You a clicker?
Yeah, we'll need that.
Okay.
Make sure it works. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm always worried about these things. What, we gave them 10 minutes?
Yep. I got like 2 or 3 more. Like people moving.
Well, I mean, you know, obviously half of the class is afraid of us.
Yes.
They don't want to seem to be really involved.
Including the doctors we know.
Yeah.
Doctor. Wait, hold on. Are they all back there? Right. Doctor.
Where's Kevin? We need Kevin.
Right, because it's so much, right?
We gotta come back.
Right, and it also depends on who your audience is too.
just after being in the room and watching everybody else, and the fact that they're either going to pay attention or they're not.
And you don't want to.
Okay, there's Cindy.
Okay, we'll get started.
Well, obviously, according to mine, he ended at 3:40. So,
Oh,
but I didn't look at that clock because that clock has been faster. But
I think this is about everyone. Give them. Yeah, they're grabbing drinks.
Kevin better show up though, because we need him. Yeah, he said he was going to come. We can wait till they come in the room. There's Kevin.
Okay. There we go.
Oh, and that was the woman who was sitting next to me in the
There we go. Okay.
Ready? Sure, why not? Okay. Thank you. Okay. Are you going to leave it in? I mean, it's fine. All right. Ready to start?
Go for it.
Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, let me turn my mic on. So I don't know if you can actually hear me or not. Woo, yes, there we go. I'll try not to be loud. The sad thing is they gave me a microphone, and I actually never need one. So I will apologize if I'm loud. I'm going to move that a little lower then. So, welcome to this afternoon. My name is Karen Aberts. I am the manager of learning technologies here at Wake Med. I also, in a previous life, I have a Master of Fine Arts in stage management, so working in professional theater for the majority of my life, starting, at the age of 2. So yeah, I've moved up. And then this is my colleague, Melanie.
Hi, my name is Melanie. I'm one of the simulation educators here in Raleigh. My background is in nursing, and I don't need a mic either, apparently. My background is in nursing. Clinical background is in emergency medicine. And thankfully that we have Karen in our department, we were asked to put this talk together for you guys. We kind of embody some of these techniques, and she is extremely helpful when we're coming up with some creative scenarios. So we wanted to talk to you guys about that today. So some of our objectives, we're going to look a little bit more at this immersive environment. I know Erin talked about it a little bit with you guys, and we want to dig a little bit more. We want to look at some common barriers that people have to implementing it. I think this is a challenge for a lot of programs. It's trying to figure out, how do you do this? Do you have the time? Do you have the resources? We're going to dig a little bit into that. And I want to offer you guys some educational tools that you might be able to use. So there's some organizational tools that the theater world actually uses that we found quite helpful, especially when we're dealing with large groups. It can help improve our simulations. We're going to look at some multimedia, how to work with Confederates, props and sets. And then finally, we're going to let you guys look at some examples. And we're going to use these examples. I know some people in the room might have participated in some of them. This is not our own work 100%. We don't want to claim any of this as 100%. This is a collective effort. The goal of giving you these examples is so we want to make sure that you can at least take something. If you can take one thing back and say, you know what, and it sparks an idea when you're trying to come up with something creative, then we have succeeded. Okay. So some of the goals of creating immersive environments, why in the world do we want to do it? Besides the fact that it's cool, it's fun, okay? I was super excited the other day when they asked me to do esophageal varice, and I got to figure out how to make my simulator bleed out their mouth. That was really fun, okay? Little messy. But can I improve my learning outcomes? That's the purpose, and that's what we want to think about. In this case, it actually did. Part of it was having to pass a Blakemore tube, which is a specialty tube, down. They wanted it to be messy. They wanted to have gunk everywhere. And that, besides being fun and entertaining to create, it also allowed us to improve the learning outcomes for our participants who are critical care providers. So the other reason we do it is we want to increase fidelity. And specifically when we're looking at some of the standards for simulation design, physical and psychological fidelity, okay? These are areas I think we can do when we start creating these immersive environments. Remember that the physical fidelity is how realistic the physical context is. How well do your participants believe that this is real? We can do that with immersive environments, okay? The psychological component, remember that this is maximized to its highest potential when the physical and conceptual fidelity is high. If I can make them feel like they're in the environment that they might actually be in, they're much more likely to retain it and be able to apply and use it later. Aaron talked about this a little bit, about suspending disbelief. How many of you guys have been in a scenario, you're going through the debrief, and someone complains about the technicality of the simulator? The breath sounds didn't sound right. Oh, I couldn't feel that pulse. A real person wouldn't have done that, okay? We hear it, unfortunately, all too often. I would have decompressed if I would have heard better. It's obviously the simulator, okay? So some of this immersive environment, it helps take away. We can suspend belief just a little bit better. I like to put this up as an example because there is a balance. You can create the most wonderful environment. If it's not relevant to your participant, it does not matter. There's a sweet spot. That's my happy face, okay? This goal between the realism and relevance, okay? We can make it extremely realistic, but they're never going to take anything back because it doesn't apply back to their department or their unit that they're from.
So when you start thinking about your simulations and your scenarios and things like that, it is very easy to get very excited and want to go all out and create something over the top that everybody's going to remember, everybody's going to want to do, but we don't necessarily always want to do this. Sorry, there we go. I don't know if any of you are familiar with One Crazy Summer, but I'm a big John Cusack fan, so is it not? It won't advance forward. Yep. To the next slide. So when you are thinking of simulation, yes, you do want to make sure that you're making an environment realistic. But talking to a bunch of 7-year-olds between 7 and 10 and telling them that, you know, you're going to have to push their eyeballs back in with a stick, things like that, might take things just a little over the top. So when you are creating your environments, these are the things you have to think about. The realities, as well as what is actually going to be relevant and enhance the actual simulation. Not something that's just going to say, you know, how many times have you all done online training for a class? Yeah, everybody does them nowadays. And everybody loves to put little emojis and everything, right? But it means nothing relevant to actually what is on the slide. It's the same concept with this. Keep it relevant, and that way your participants are all going to start buying into it. They're all going to start believing in these things. So there are always some barriers to creating environments.
I put as the top budget. Does anyone else feel that way? I do. Budget and time kind of probably tie for me. Some of our creative solutions for budget, honestly, grants, I'm not going to lie to you. Grant writing is a skill. It's a wonderful skill to have. If you have anyone in your organization that can write grants, please pick their brain. It gets you extra money. You'd be amazed what kind of money you can get for disaster drills, okay, if you write a grant for it. It allows you to do way more things to create way better immersive environments for our students. Everyone doesn't have a grant writer, but you can take a single grant class. And so even that, if you can just be help on that aspect, become the expert in your department on it and try to see what additional funding is out there. The other thing, partner up with somebody. 2 organizations might have more money than just one. If you can work with somebody else to create this environment, go for it, okay? Time, does anyone have problems with that? Okay, we have so much on our plate, and it gets fuller and fuller and fuller, and currently I'm probably eating off of my placemat. I mean, it just is overflow with at this point in time. I really do. I try to pre-block my commitments. We budget ourselves a year out for some of these bigger events that we do. We also make sure that we budget our planning time, and I literally will block time on my calendar, and we try to block literally just weeks to dedicate to it. It's hard to do, but if you do it a year out, you're going to be much more successful in trying to find the time to do this. Sometimes there's skills and knowledge barriers. I am not a construction expert. I don't build sets. I happen to know people who know how to do this. And so I find my resources, okay? Karen's husband is actually, he can design sets. That's his job, and he's all about it. And I pick his brain, and I pick his knowledge, and we definitely use it. And then I'm not gonna lie, YouTube. My philosophy is if I see 3 different things on YouTube, and I put it all together, I probably have it about right, okay? So you can do anything from YouTube. We do have issues with personnel, and we're gonna dig a little bit more into this. Think about your non-FTEs. We all get so caught up in how many FTEs do we have in our department. I don't have the resources to do this. Volunteers. Who can you beg into coming? We were completely short. I had to do a simulation at a freestanding emergency department on emergency delivery. It was me alone. Everyone else was gone. I conned my husband into wearing that belly. And I dragged him to the freestanding emergency department. Okay? And he gave birth. It was actually really entertaining. But no, he might not have been.
A little bit of coercion.
But he is a paramedic. He does have a baseline knowledge to him. We talked through it, and he was voluntold, but he was able to do this, and it helped. It got me, otherwise I'd have to cancel the class, okay? Because it's really hard to facilitate if you're wearing the belly at the same time, okay? It makes it a little bit of a challenge. And then students. I love using students. I recruit them, I find them. Especially we have a lot of master's level nursing students that are looking for preceptors. It's hard to find them. I volunteer. I go out of my way to tell nursing ed, please send them to me. Because guess what? When they come and they're looking for a project, they can help me. I help them, they help me, okay? So don't be afraid of the use of students. The other thing is we have community colleges. How many of you guys have community colleges around you? They're always looking for something, okay? Talk to the instructors. You have to have a little bit more pre-planning on this, but talk to the instructors. You can get it built into the curriculum, okay? That's free labor. So I love using students with their knowledge. I tell them what's going on. The other thing that we run into is space. And I think that's a big challenging issue for a lot of people is how do I find space? We have used warehouse space before for some of our larger creations that we're having to do. It's not in our department. It is not our department's warehouse space, but we ask very nicely, and we arrange to try to borrow. How many bring it home? I've built simulators and rebuilt them or done stuff at home, okay? That is still space. You can still use that. The other thing to think about is outside of peak hours. Disaster drills especially. If you're trying to do something large scale in the community, a lot of times the rentals are really expensive, but if you start to do something on a Wednesday morning, and then you throw in it's for the community, you'd be amazed what kind of rates you can get for renting out a park or a theater, okay?
Yeah, I will say that we do luck up in this area particularly. We have a lot of community theaters in the area that have spaces and are willing to, when they don't have performances during the daytime, utilize a bare stage. So, I mean, you might not have ever thought of that, but I mean, it's the same thing if you've got a community college that has any sort of performance space or things like that, of calling and finding out because it's a big, empty room. And then you can get a lot of people on the stage, you can do a lot more things, and it can be something that's a great resource that you've never really thought of using. I know that we did it for our leadership here. We took them out to Raleigh Little Theater because they wanted them, and you know, it wasn't a simulation, but they wanted them to be out of their environment, as opposed to being safe in a classroom, always, you know, talking to the same people. But they made them go out and do improv. And from there, the team building that they were doing after where, you know, made a completely different element for them. Let's see. So now we're going to talk about, you know, theater. How many of you actually gone to live theater? Okay. All right, more of you should go. I'm a huge advocate, so go. It's not for the elite. But one of the greatest things, and I mean, you know, Aaron mentioned it in his talk as well, theater, a lot of people say theater is supposed to be recreating a slice of life. And to do that, they use a bunch of different elements. They will use lights, they will use sets, they will use costumes, makeup, people, sound, anything that they can to make you walk in from outside and feel you have gone back 200 years and are at the turn of the century or in the middle of 1800 and things like that, just to get you to go there. It's very different than going to a movie. It's much more immersive, and yes, you do have to give a little bit of suspension of reality, because there's that fourth wall that they always talk about, if you've ever taken a theater class, that performers are not supposed to go past. It's like, I'm talking to you, but I'm not talking to you. Because, you know, who really does just stand out here and go, oh, to be or not to be, blah, blah, blah. And nobody really just breaks out into song and dance in the middle of the world, you know? So you gotta go with it. But, so in talking about these things, something to learn about is some of the roles in a theater production that can also relate to putting together a simulation. Stage management, that is my background, that is what I do. When I tell people what a stage manager does, then they always ask me what a director does, because I do everything to make sure that the director's vision is put onto that stage. So the director comes up with the vision. The director creates that world. He envisions it, he works with the designers, he works with the actors to create that world. As a stage manager, I'm the person who makes sure that that world comes to life every night. I'm the person that makes sure that actors are where they're supposed to be, when they're supposed to be, wearing the costumes they're supposed to be, lights, scenery, costumes, all of that stuff happens literally at the exact same time for every performance. And when you're doing 6 weeks of the exact same performance, I can tell you it gets dull.
But one reason that we bring this up, and I want you guys to think as you're going through this, a lot of times we try to be both. We create this environment and simulation, and we're trying to be the manager and the director at the same time. And so think about how, I think theater brings a lot into think about how the stage manager versus director roles are, and then how can you apply that back to your department?
Yeah, so for your simulations, when you start thinking about it, you've got the person who's creating the simulation, who's thinking about that. Then you've got the person, the stage manager, who's really going to look at the logistics, the actual planning, thinking about who they need, when they need them, and where they should go. So separating those two, if you have somebody. And your stage manager doesn't have to be a simulation specialist. They can be your admin person. They can be anybody that you choose, and what they're going to do is help you just look at all the logistics to making sure of going down that list of everything you need to make that simulation happen. Stage manager does. They track all the props, the scene changes, all of your cues, and most important, they're tracking your performers. So when she used the words Confederates the other day, I had no idea what that was. To me, they're just all actors. So performers, Confederates, whatever you would like to refer to them as. The stage manager, they're the person that takes care of, you know, they've always got the pencils. They've always got the right utensil that you need at the right time to make sure that everything happens. But one of their big things is, in theater, they create a prompt script. This is basically your Bible. A prompt script really is a book where you document everything. You've got it all in one place. You can reuse your simulations by having it all written down somewhere and filed away. Then you can just pull it right off the shelf and go, last time we did this, these were the props I needed, these were the this I needed, these are how many people I needed to volunteer. You've got it all written down, and then you can recreate. In theater, we create this is actually one of my scripts. So if you're writing out your story, per se, this is where you're putting down all your cues, where everything is happening. This is your, a sound cue that you might have of the ambulance coming in or the fire crackling or something like that. And then this is everything that I had written down of who goes where and when. So it's a little more detailed than you probably need for your scenario, but at least even if you're just doing little bullet points to say, well, Betty's gonna enter here, John's got to remember to bring on his medical bag, things like that, your notations. So here's your story that you're telling, and then that's what you need to be able to help make sure that that story happens. One of the biggest things that I always say is your prompt script or your Bible has to be neat, organized, and easily legible. Should you get hit by a bus, somebody needs to be able to walk in and still run that simulation. I've started moving to the should you win the lottery and you decide to go to Tahiti, the miserable people staying still have to be able to run that simulation. So the more organized you can be and that you can plan ahead, the more down the line you're going to make your life a lot easier for you or for anybody else coming into a role working with you. So then we also go into talking about the various multimedia things that get used in simulation.
So again, thinking back on multimedia, what is your end goal? There is such thing as too much. Okay? There is an overload that we can do with our participants to where they're focusing on the multimedia aspects and they're no longer focusing back on that simulator. Okay? So always go back to those original objectives that you wrote. What is the end goal? Cameras, I know there's a lot of talk. Does everyone record every single thing that happens in the sim lab? Okay. Are there certain things you want to record, though? How many cameras do you need for it? It changes for us. If we are recording, I'm going to have a lot more cameras set up, especially when we're doing a process review or we're doing an analysis or we're doing a drill, because I'm going to get 4 or 5 different angles. We'll set them up to GoPros, and we link the time so we can be able to see everything. Especially when you're doing your larger scenarios, if you have multiple patients, it's helpful to have more angles. Think about what type of camera you need. This might get you into a little bit more expense sometimes, but remember you have friends. I have borrowed stuff from PR before, okay? So always try to see if there's some resource that you can use to borrow it. Also think about the space. I gave some examples. It's great. We got a picture of our simulator. He decided to take a helicopter ride. It was a STEMI process analysis. That's great that he got in the helicopter, but how are we going to see anything left in the helicopter? Okay. They actually ended up attaching it to the back of the pilot's seat. They put a GoPro on it, so that way they could see the entire flight, because they were not able to put another person in there. And that's what they had to end up using, and they used that to debrief later.
So, oh, we didn't put a space between, doesn't look like, anyway. Lighting and sound are other things that can go for you. I know lighting, in most cases, you're dealing with fluorescent lights. But things that you can do to enhance that is, you're thinking about, is it supposed to be daytime? Is it supposed to be nighttime? Can you at least dim the lights so that you can make it say, this is, 11 p.m.? That sort of stuff. Make sure you've pulled the window shades. If you can add extra lighting, even if all you're doing is using a big lamp on a pole that helps either make it bright or add some other effect, or if you're wanting to sort of create the effect of fire and you get, just a light that can kind of just do some swirls of color to help just enhance that moment. DJ lighting is really, really cheap, and that can actually do a lot for you, things like that. But otherwise, at least most people are thinking of that day and nighttime sort of thing. Theater uses it, of course, to evoke a mood. It definitely does show time of day, but theater uses it a lot more in that sense. And while in simulation, you're probably not necessarily trying to evoke a mood, it can, if you have the opportunity to ever use additional lighting, it can be a really great sense. You wanted to talk about specifically like OR versus a parking lot.
So 2 examples for you just to think about. We had a group that wanted to come down. They were practicing procedures. They have lots of light in the OR. I couldn't get my hands on the sterile OR light. They wouldn't give it to me because they didn't want to bring you into our sim lab. So I borrowed lights from PR. And this is normally what we use to do photographs. They're real lights. One incidental thing that happened on it, in the evaluations when I was looking over it, people said it was so realistic because they were actually sweating. That was not my intent. I just wanted to give them enough light so they could see like it really was. In the end, they thought it was better. They thought it was so immersive, they thought it was cool that they were sweating. Not my intention, but it worked out well. Parking lots is the other thing. We do a lot of in situ. We were practicing pulling patients out of a car. This happened to overlap into the night, so we were actually outside. It was rather interesting, the dynamics that happened between 5 o'clock and the 9 o'clock group. And it's something that we never thought about, but in the end, it actually helped us with some of our process and some of our analyses, that we actually realized we might have had a deficiency in this. We weren't intentionally looking for lighting, but if I were to do this again, it is something that I would bring up, and we would actually try to recreate that scenario, because it actually was helpful at night when they were trying to get it out. They didn't realize how much harder it was. The experience was different between 5 and between 8 o'clock.
Sound. Sound, as you know, if you've ever gone to the movies and, you know, the scary thing, nothing is happening but the girl walking in the dark, but you've got creepy music behind her. You're like, don't open the door. But I mean, so sound, think about how that is relevant. You were supposed to be in a house that is being consumed by fire, but it's dead quiet. Why don't you have the sounds of fire going around to give them a sense of a ceiling crashing in a room next door? Or they are outside in the woods and it starts raining. You can add the sound of rain that gives them the element, even though they're not really going to get wet, but it gives them that element, hopefully, of thinking, oh my gosh, I need to now move faster because my patient and I are now getting soaked. So adding sound can make a huge difference. Voices for support. If you're doing a mass casualty, you're going to have people screaming and yelling and doing all sorts of things. So if you're in a classroom that's really quiet, there are no noises, people are easily going to say, well, it didn't feel real to me. I had no sense of urgency. You know, things like that. Distractions. Those are things that you can throw in there just to throw people off. You are doing something that they're out, you know, somebody was going to save a hiker and you're out on the trail. Well, now suddenly there are wolves howling. Do you think your person might kind of go, okay? You know, so think of those things that might enhance it, but give a little bit of difference so that it creates a different environment for them to think about in working. One of these things, everybody knows Mary Poppins, right? Disney's Mary Poppins. Very happy, very cheery movie. Well, see what happens when somebody actually redid a trailer for it to make it seem slightly less happy. I know it doesn't like to start. How many of you want to see that Mary Poppins version? But I mean, those are all the clips from the movie, but you just put them together in a different order and you add really creepy, creepy music behind it. And you're like, oh my God, it's The Exorcist. So sound, something that a lot of people completely forget about and ignore, but can really make a difference to the environment that you're working in.
We always like to think about, are these distractions helpful? Does it add to it? And so when you're thinking about adding sound, does it add to it? I've done a simulation where there was just literally somebody crying outside the room. No one really paid attention much to it until the debrief. And then we brought up the point that was the mom that you left outside the room. She's just been crying on the curtain. That was extremely helpful. One of our objectives was to make sure that we're talking about patient and family inclusion, especially when we're coding a pediatric patient. And that was worth well more than me just saying out loud. By the way, where was mom in this? So working with Confederates, that's our next topic that we're going to move on to. Standardized patients, whatever you want to call them, actors. Okay, we call them Confederates. How many of you guys work with Confederates on a regular basis? Okay, they really do add a lot to your simulation. Anyone have a budget specifically to hire Confederates? No, you do? Oh, that's awesome. Where do you work at? Sorry, I just have to know. Okay, where's Dr. Patel? See, we can write this in our budget. I keep on trying. Okay, so.
See?
Oh,
Yeah, so
there
you
you
gave
go.
money.
Okay. So where do I find Confederates? Subject matter experts. A lot of times we will use our subject matter experts as part of our Confederates. I recruit them. If your department needs education because you're trying to meet a competency need, well, congratulations. You are now my Confederate. Okay? So I'm going to bring you into the simulation. And they're free, which is really, really nice. Staff members and colleagues. Absolutely. I do recruit my friends. As you heard, I recruited my husband. I have recruited Karen before. She is not a simulation educator, but I needed her. And so she came with me, and she was actually a Confederate for me as well. Some other resources for you. You can do students.
Yep, as we talked about earlier, students. High school students are looking for all sorts of fun things. You know anybody who's got them, they got nothing else to do, there you go. But your colleges, your community colleges, your nursing students, all of those have a plethora of people that can either, you can work with their instructors to see if they can get extra credit for a class, or with a little bit of bribery of, hey, we'll feed you. You can usually bring in a lot that way. Professional actors, that's a whole nother option. Professional actors, here we do actually have quite a few in the area that do a lot of standardized patients here, and the going rate in the Raleigh area is right between $15 and $20 an hour. So it's not terribly expensive, but I do know that it does come out of a budget that you probably don't have. But if you can, I mean, you can easily contact any of the community theaters and just say, hey, do you know actors who would do this, who've got the time? And they can usually say, yeah, we've got a ton of them who would love to do that. And you do have to then supply them, though, with information. So, you know, actors, and depending on your level of acting skill, your professional level, you can, there are pros and cons to bringing in them, because they might, well, where's my director? What's my motivation for being here? And what do you mean there's no food service? So, but that really, you know, that's kind of the extreme actor case. Most of them really are just like, hey, yeah, what do you want me to do? Do I need to dress anything in particular? So, you know, so there are pros and cons to any of these, but I mean, honestly, your best bet, ask. Ask anyone, hey, you know, we want to do this education. Can you just be the hysterical mom? Or can you be, you know, the doctor who comes in, walks in and goes, no, I can't help you, and walks out. You'd be amazed at who's like, oh yeah, I can do that for 5 minutes. That's not a problem. So.
Speaking about our subject matter experts, some of the advantages that I have seen working with them, remember these are clinical people. They're really engaged. Most of them really want to. These are groups that they work with. So typically they're very willing to do it. I think some of the limitations when working with this group specifically is they have no acting skills. Some of them might have a little bit in the background, but just realize the quality might not be what you expect, might take a little bit of coaching. Sometimes, especially I've also found with this group, is they end up becoming the teacher even though they're the actor, and that confuses the participants. Because they look at them as their supervisor or their educator, and they get a little bit confused about what role they're in at that point in time. So I think that is one of the drawbacks for using them. When trying to get your colleagues, they tend to be a little bit more versed in sim. They've probably acted at least once or twice because they've already been dragged into it a few times. But sometimes you get them unfamiliar with the topic. Maybe that's in a clinical area that they've never worked before, and so they might do something that your participants say, that's completely unrealistic. Okay, that would never happen in the ED. They would never act like that. So that is sometimes can be a challenge for staff members. Working with students is their schedule. I think that's the biggest drawback of working with students is their schedule gets a little bit more hectic and chaotic and trying to get them in. Because remember, they're probably just doing this for a class grade. So we kind of have to do a little bit more planning with them. So, here are some of our Confederates. So we do disaster drills on a regular basis. How many of you guys help participate in disaster drills, disaster planning? A lot of times it's done on paper, right? Okay, and so it's a paper process. This is actually just a small group that we did at one of our other hospitals. There's actually way, way more of them. You see the ladies in pink? Those are actually volunteers for the hospital. They got recruited as well, okay? I think someone's children got recruited as well. And just so we could add even more patients, they all had scripts down here, but they had a script for themselves and then what was for the baby, okay? So these are some of our Confederates that we had worked with. No one had previous experience doing this. This involved a significant pre-brief to them to let them know what was going on. It is way easier to work with a real person than to move that disaster drill when it's a paper, okay? There are so many more logistical challenges you run into. This didn't cost us any more money. It took a smidgen more time to get a few more people, and it took contacting the volunteer office, and they were able to get more people on that day. They also found it very entertaining. The volunteers liked that, so.
One of the great things about using real people versus sometimes the simulations is you never know what's going to happen. That's the great thing about a performance, even if you're running it, you know, when I'm doing a show, I can do the same performance for 6 weeks, 6 nights a week, and seriously, it's never the same performance every night because the energy level is different. Somebody forgets a line, somebody does this. You're doing something like this, you really don't know if somebody walks in at the wrong time or somebody sits down at the wrong chair and you're like, you're not bleeding. You know, things like that. So, I mean, they're going to add a different element to your training, but be flexible, be patient with them, especially if they are free. If they are volunteering, you've got to take that into consideration that, you know, we can only plan so much. You know, it's like the same thing of you plan for that perfect wedding day, and then that day comes, and, you know, the father of the bride is late or something like this. You know, you just have to go with it. The wedding's going to happen. Your disaster is going to happen. So.
Even if your Confederates wander off to the bathroom in the middle of it and they can't find patients and they think they lost them.
Yes.
It's happened.
So other things to consider when you are working with your Confederates is costuming.
So it's expensive. You can borrow. Community theater sometimes will let you borrow stuff. I am a personal fan of the thrift store. My friend Flo, she's our synthetic cadaver. That's her in the bathtub up there in the top. She needed an outfit. She was supposed to be going to a pill party, actually, I think in that one. No. Sorry, that was a different one. She was supposed to be wearing a dress. She ends up in a bathtub. I wasn't going to risk one of mine, and we didn't have any donated to us, so I went to the thrift store. It was rather interesting. A bunch of ladies thought it was very entertaining what I was doing, helped me find a necklace, a purse, and shoes for her. Okay? I spent under $10 for her outfit. And so for her in that situation, it was actually really helpful because that was hiding a wound. There was a purpose to the costume. If they never lifted up her clothes, they never would have seen it. And that's the reason we had it there, was to make sure the assessment. If I just left her naked or in a hospital gown, it wouldn't have been realistic to them. This is our House of Horrors. It's something that we've done for many years now. It basically allows participants to go through an environment and try to find the horrors in the environment, and we do it on Halloween. So it makes it a little bit more fun. But we routinely take costumes and let people dress up. But that adds to the environment, and it kind of adds to a little bit of the fun factor.
Those of you who have been to Bobby's class with Moulage at any of this time hopefully learned a lot about how important it can actually be to enhance your story. So makeup. Makeup is very important. True, we're not talking your street makeup. Make sure that your eyes are pretty and that your lips are red. We're talking about your injuries. How do you do that? And these were a couple of people that were in my class. Those were their injuries because they looked better than mine. So those sort of things. So don't forget how much that this can help completely tell your story. I mean, one of the things that Bobby was talking about was, you know, somebody's come in and they have a bruise and it's only been an hour. Well, that bruise isn't going to be all black and blue and yellow. It might be just looking like a little bit of a rash. So take those into consideration. And again, can add more time, but can truly make a difference if you set up the time in advance to be able to do this. If you're using live people, of course, there's always more issues and challenges with that than when you have some of your simulation bodies. But, you know, again, it really does continue telling the full story. So when you start putting all of these elements together, it makes a huge difference. So this is one of the scenarios that was one of the last competitions. So the guy eating his arm, the guy had been on bath salts. And in the simulation, they're dealing with the simulation body, and he just walks in and just continues chewing on his arm. He's really not part of the simulation, but he really did make the guys responding kind of going, are we supposed to be taking care of him too? What are we doing? So the random things, the distractions, the other things that you can do and make those elements, I mean, why not? If you can add them, if you've got the time to do it, it tells a completely different story than two guys coming in and responding to just the body laying on the floor.
So we're going to give you guys some examples. We want to, going on the same thing that Aaron has, tell the story. There are things that you can do to your environment.
So yeah, I mean, if you ever go to a theater production, you realize that there are so many elements that create that world. Like I said, the lights, the sets, the costumes, everything does. But it makes a huge difference. In many cases, well, how many of you have ever been to a Cirque du Soleil show or seen them on thing? Cirque du Soleil is one of the most creative things I've ever gotten to see. I mean, they truly merge all of the elements of lights, music, costuming, the performers, all of that together. You take one of those elements away, you take away the really cool, amazing costumes and makeup, it's still a cool show, but it's not the same feeling. So, I mean, that's kind of the concept of looking at this. What is going to make it more immersive? So you are creating that environment. So you're setting your scene, per se. And then, but also be realistic. What do you really need versus what would you like to have? I mean, okay, the scenario with Flo, you needed a bathtub. You didn't need the shower curtain, you didn't need the sink, you didn't need the toilet, you didn't need the whole bathroom. But you got the sense that you were in a bathroom because there was a bathtub. Or if you're doing an apartment scene, or you're doing, there's something that's happened in a bar. Well, get some chairs, because there would be chairs in a bar area, or there would be tables in a bar area that they might have to wander through to get to the patient laying on the floor. So they can be simple elements that you've got in your room, and no, they don't have to be bar chairs. Grab these. If you've got them available, think outside of the box that way of what do I really need, and do I need it to be an exact replica, or can I pull something from the office that we've got, or things like that. But what is great is, yes, you can get people who will donate stuff. You can always put stuff out on Craigslist. You never know. Rentals, again, your custom shops, your community theaters, or colleges, great resources. If you do have a community theater, they usually have a prop storage, and 9 times out of 10, most of them realize, oh, you're going to use that for a day? Well, as long as you're not going to bring it back blood-stained, we're good with that. So, and all of us have rated our own homes, I'm sure, for various things. So, I mean, we were talking, I believe Amar was talking about that they did a scenario where they were getting a hiker or something, and they had to, so the paramedics had to hike up. Well, they couldn't get a mountain, so they made them get on the stair stepper for so many minutes. And then they could go to the patient. So, I mean, things like that. Simple stuff that will still give you an element of something, but you could hopefully get from, the gym down the hall or something like that. So don't think about that. In theater, the biggest thing is if you ever do props, beg, borrow, and steal, and then you just kind of go, oh, I'm sorry about that. So it can be the same thing. go to the office next door and say, hey, you got that little end table that you're not using? Can I have it for the next 2 hours? Go and do that. You know, so don't think that you have to create the most realistic, but try to at least think about the environment and what's going to make a difference to whoever you're training and how it's going to do. So now we've got a couple of things, some samples of scenarios that we have done here, or our team has done. I have not.
I promise we will get out. We got about 5 minutes left. We got 3 different scenarios that I'm going to run through real quickly with you guys. Karen alluded on one of our scenarios. One of our scenarios, it was a competition. They wanted to have a helicopter crash on top of a mountain. And then the job was for the paramedic teams that were coming in, they needed to quickly triage. They needed to be able to figure out how to extricate. I can't get a helicopter on top of a mountain, no matter what I try to do. I'm sure you could check around to see if someone's done Miss Saigon recently, and maybe they have a helicopter hanging around their props department. But that was not an option. There was a budget for this one. So this is what they ended up doing. There was a stair climber involved. They made them take all of their gear up on the stair climber with them, which added a very interesting dynamic to it as how well they were able to take care of the patient once they got done with their minute and a half. I think it might have been slightly cruel. That was Dr. Patel, I think, thought of some of that. Couldn't find a helicopter, okay? This is the helicopter, though. It was the same dimensions inside. They actually really did think about it. It's PVC pipe. It gets the point across, okay? They were able to put a simulator. He was able to sit inside a seat inside the helicopter, and they were able to safely extricate him, okay? So this is just kind of some creative uses. Remember, this is a lot of stuff we've done with other groups too.
But you also notice that they've got the smoke as if from an actual crash. It helps just create that environment of something being a little more urgent, then there would be no fire, you know, that sort of thing.
I'm going to show you guys this one. This is another competition. This was a fetal abduction. This one was an actual set designed, and there were walls built. Yay! Yes. But the reason that there was a set was there was a purpose. It was about making sure that you had actually got everyone. They ended up putting a victim here, a victim in the bathtub, and a victim in the sink. And there was 2 paramedics, and it really freaked them out, okay? But the way that it was designed, there was actual openings. There's a reason that that entire set was built, okay? Because that was actually testing the objective. A normal one that didn't have any objective like that, should we have built a whole room? We probably didn't need a whole room. But since that was a vital, important part, they actually built this. And this was built overnight. It was like magic because they had pre-built everything. It was absolutely amazing. Let me show you a little bit more about this one. So the scene is our mother, who's Flo, wearing her lovely dress. She ends up getting her baby abducted. She's pregnant, like 9 months pregnant. And she ends up getting her baby abducted. She has to live in water, so that was our confounding factor for our simulator. So when they came to us and say, hey, can we have someone cut open with a baby? We said, we got one. Her name's Flo. She's a synthetic cadaver, but she has to live in a tub. Well, congratulations. Now we had a bathtub there. Okay, so she ended up staying that. She ended up going through 6 different teams and different competitions that day. She got pulled out of the tub every single time, and it made a delightful mess on the floor. And then her baby ended up in the sink. Okay. Half the teams pulled her out. Some of the teams ended up calling her dead in the tub. It was rather interesting, but it was because we made that environment. It allowed people to do different things. We had a team, I think, completely missed the baby for like the first minute, and there were some loud, bad words said, shall I say, when they realized there was a baby still in the sink. Okay? So this one helped create the scene because that's what we were trying to test. That's what the goal of this competition was, to try to make sure that we're treating all the patients and doing the best for all of them with the limited resources. I'm going to give you one last one that was recently done. This was a cave. I know it doesn't look like a cave, but it was a cave, okay? I'll show you a video of it in our last few minutes. So the goal of this one is there was a father who ended up hiking with the son. Son falls down. They put son in the cave. Our rescuers have to come to him and help the son. Meanwhile, dad falls down in the cave too, because of course you can't just have one person down. That would make it way too easy. So this, as you'll see in the video I'm about to show you, is actually a box. It's a plywood box, okay? Less than $50 was spent. Made the box at someone's house, okay? Painted it. Those were all curtains that were rented or stolen temporary borrowed from the facility. And behind us, the name of the tent, Dr. Patel, because I never get it right. It is one of the disaster tents. We kindly borrowed that from our local up the road in Garner. They use them for disaster training, and we promised them no disasters that weekend, and they let us have one for the weekend. So we took it down. There were some challenges putting this up. Kevin, I know, who was putting it up, he said once they got it all up, it sounded really great on paper. They got it all put together, and they realized all of a sudden, oh, you could see all these lights. So then a lot of duct tape was involved. But this created a dark scene. So let me show you guys in our last few minutes our cave scenario. They really didn't want to go in the cave. There's a little coaxing involved. They really didn't want to go in. They're still trying to convince him to come. So then Dad ends up becoming our second patient in there because he falls down, just to make it more fun.
And we do have there's a real person, of course, doing the child's voice for them to be able to hear.
So this was set up with infrared cameras. This is the rest of the participants could see this on the inside. They were wearing glasses. It was as dark as you possibly could, because one of the objectives is what can you do in the dark? That was the goal. They wanted to see, do you know your bag well enough to be able to do this? Okay. Can you accurately assess and triage if you're not seeing someone? It's a different set of skills that really caused them to think outside the box. So Dad walked in. We ended up having Dad as a simulator, okay? You see the skeleton in there? That was our fun. We just put him in there. People occasionally crawled over him in the
around
dark.
on the floor.
And then when you feel the bones, you're like, oh, okay, obviously not the patient I'm trying to save. And then we ended up having a pediatric patient in the very far background. If you notice, there's operators in the room, so they had to have night vision on too. They had to be evaluating. These were the evaluators in the room. I think this is probably one of the more complicated scenarios we did, but it's actually been one of the most fun. This took a lot of planning, but in the end, it accomplished the goals, and it was a good experience. So that was our 3 examples. We hope that hopefully, if anyone gets any ideas from them, how you can bring them back to your own, we're happy to take any questions you have.
Yes.
I just kind of want to share one of the biggest successes I've had from some of your Confederates. Actually retired people like healthcare workers or physicians or police officers who are actually have been in the field, but they're retired now. So you don't run into the schedule, they just love to help out.
That's a good
idea.
idea.
That is a great resource.
It's a very good idea.
I was just questioning about that scenario. It was a disaster drill, I guess, right? And why did they not want to go? I mean, the whole point would have been, to me, would have thought you need to go in there, but they weren't going in there.
That team, I think was just a little hesitant to go in at that point in time. But this was, Aaron, that was a competition. That was a competition for critical care.
That was AMT safety.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so your first information is EMS providers is scene safety. And one could argue a dark cave where you can't see the unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
So there was some set of rule breaking that we were doing.
Well, it's kind of like in the shooting, if you run and help somebody, you're going to get shot too. So I guess that's.
There are literally our dirty tricks.
Okay.
Yeah, come on. They put in a skeleton for no apparent reason whatsoever. So.
Well, thank you guys. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
I think you did a good job of expressing.
Is that ours? Yes. Okay. Okay, then that must be ours. I'm gonna go with it.